Hello everyone, Storm 101 here. Today, there's a lot of stuff we could be talking about. We got MS 970 that's expected to form into a tropical storm, which can bring impacts to Florida and areas along the East Coast. At the same time, we're going to have a big system that's going to be moving into the northwestern U.S., and that could blow up into a massive storm system in the Midwest, and that could bring in a legitimate blizzard threat for parts of the Dakotas, northern Minnesota, and possibly down into parts of Nebraska. And that's going to be ahead of a big pattern change. A lot of us is definitely going to be turning colder next week as well. Before we get started this video, if you guys like weather related content, you can subscribe to my channel. We do stuff here all the time on this channel. Plus, we may have a couple more updates on this topic as well. So definitely stay tuned for more updates as well. So we're going to start with the GFS model of what's going on right now. Of course, which unfortunately I missed on this, did not make a video about it, but we did have a tornado outbreak over parts of the Severn Plains into Texarkana. That same system has moved way up into Canada, but it's definitely left a trailing cold front behind. And the cold front is definitely not nearly as strong like it was back on Friday. So, yeah, and unfortunately, that's brought a lot of devastation down to some of those areas. And I think there's definitely a possibility one of those tornadoes might be rated EF4. So we'll have to wait and see how damage surveys go on down there. But damage surveys will likely be going on over the next several weeks. But putting that off to the side, let's check out in the future. And it's going to get very interesting by later this week. Not a whole lot to talk about other than the fact we're going to have active weather in the northwest. That's going to bring in much needed rain and snow to the higher elevations. Check that out going into Tuesday. Heavy snowfall in the higher elevations of California. Meanwhile, we got a tropical system in the Atlantic, and we're going to have this ridge of high pressure that's going to build to the north of the system. That's going to make it track into Florida, stick around for a couple days, and eventually wherever this storm system gets its act together, it continues to move to the east. That's going to help able push this storm here kind of along the east coast. But you can see here in the weather world here in the United States, it's going to be a pretty busy Thursday and into Friday. I mean, check that storm system out in the Midwest. You're talking about a 988 millibar low in southwestern Minnesota with heavy snow across the Dakotas into northern Minnesota. You also get a mix of sleet and ice or freezing rain to the north of the low. This might also bring some severe weather potential for parts of Iowa and Missouri, so that's another thing to watch for. Uh, but at that same time, we got this tropical system impacting uh, Central Florida. And look what happens here as you kind of move into Saturday here. So our remains of our tropical system is off the east coast of North Carolina, but a lot of its moisture is getting pulled into this storm system up here, and that might bring a lot of rain for parts of the Northeast, especially along the East Coast as well. And eventually by the weekend, this is when we're going to begin our winter-like pattern for the central and the eastern U.S. So that's kind of the broad picture. Let's go a little bit more in depth with this. And we're going to go in depth with the tropics first. So we're going to start off with the National Hurricane Center. We got two different areas that's likely going to develop over the next couple of days. The system that we're watching very closely is the one that's north of Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic in Haiti. It's got a 90% chance of developing in the next 5 days. And you can see here where they have it tracking. They have it tracking towards the Bahamas and eventually to the eastern part of Florida. There's also this other area that's out in the central Atlantic. This is pretty much going to be a fish storm. It's not really going to impact anybody out there, but looks like that has a pretty good chance of developing as well. And really, overall, the tropics have been pretty active so far this November. And typically, hurricane season does go through November, but comparing over the last several years, November's not really been a very active month. So this is definitely some interesting stuff that's been going on out here. But really, the system we're primarily focused on is Invest 97L. And if you check out sea surface temperature anomalies out there, it is well above normal off the east coast of the northeast. That's going to help bring in quite a bit of moisture for folks in the northeast, which some of those people do need some rain up there. It's definitely been pretty dry for some of those folks up there, and this system will definitely do that for sure. But it could also bring a lot of rain for parts of the east coast of the Carolinas, and especially down to parts of Florida as well. And really, overall, this storm system's got a pretty decent environment out ahead of it. So one of the ingredients is there, and you got warm sea surface temperature anomalies, and even up in the parts of the northwestern part of the Atlantic, it's also got well above normal sea surface temperature anomalies. For a check out pre-sealable water compared to normal, really the system here is not going to be dealing with much way of dry air. Really the only exception is early on, which is having a little bit of trouble of organizing. You got some of this dry air that's down here over parts of Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Puerto Rico. Some of that is getting pulled into the circulation, so that is making it a hard time for this system here to get organized. But really later on, as soon as it gets more moisture wrapped around the system, really the system's got a green light for intensification, and the GFS definitely suggests that. And you can see here it makes landfall in Florida as a 977 millibar low, which has been very consistent with that. At the same time, here's your cold front over parts of the Severn Plains here, moving to the east here. You also got this ridge of high pressure to the north, and that's what's making this system here move westward. But since this cold front gets much closer, it's going to help push this ridge of high pressure farther to the east, and it's going to help pull that system there pretty much along the east coast by that point. But really, there's one uncertainty I have when it comes to the environment, and that's wind shear. And at the moment, wind shear is not terribly strong for the storm system. The only exception will be in the north side. There's a lot of wind shear on the north side. But really, by Monday and Tuesday, this system doesn't have a whole lot of wind shear to deal with. Definitely where the most wind shear will likely be on the storm system, will likely be on the western and northern side. Especially when it gets deeper into Florida, that's where it really starts to get into that wind shear. And especially when the storm system gets to move up along the east coast, it will likely be dealing with some wind shear issues out there as well. So this is what Invest 97L looks like, and honestly, in my opinion, it kind of looks like a frontal system, at least from this point of view here, but truly it's not really a frontal system. But like I was mentioning earlier, you had that dry air that's kicking into the main circulation of the storm, which is once again making this system here trouble intensifying. But really by Monday and Tuesday, it really shouldn't have much of a dry air issue. Should be able to get some convection around most of the system, and eventually by that point, this system here should have a green light for intensification. If we were to check out some hurricane models, this is the track of the system. You can see here pretty strong agreement by the guidance, making landfall in the eastern part of Florida. There's a chance it might go out into the Gulf of Mexico and could make a secondary landfall. That's certainly possible, but getting out in the Gulf of Mexico, it's a pretty short period of time. It's going to be over this water, so I'm not really expecting much intensification out there. However, it will likely return back out into parts of the Atlantic, and it may intensify a little bit better, especially when it gets up to the northeast when it begins to interact with that big trough that's going to be moving in as well. And here's the intensity, guys, from the hurricane models, and there's a strong agreement that it's going to be in a tropical storm stage, but there are a few model members out there that do bring this into hurricane strength. So it's definitely possible that Invest 98L could become a hurricane sometime this week, especially before it makes landfall into Florida. So if you're watching from east of Florida, be prepared for tropical storm or even hurricane-like conditions. So definitely be ready. And here's another way to kind of look at the Traxxas system from the GFS ensembles. It's actually got a lot of members out in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. But once again, it does track back into Florida, could make a secondary landfall, and eventually it goes back out into the Atlantic. You can see here, wherever it interacts with that trough, that's when it's going to begin to intensify. But there are a few other members that do keep this system on land, which will help prevent intensification. But when that trough does begin to interact with that system, despite being on land, at that point it won't be tropical. It might be more of a frontal system by that point, or in other words, a post-tropical uh, cyclone by that point. So I have to wait and so I have to give balls some time to really try to figure out with the system. But I think regardless here if it's going to be on land or over water, I think it still has the chance to intensify. Either if it's going to be the warm seas temperatures or it's going to be the interaction with that trough. We'll look into vorticity on that system here in just a little bit. But let's talk about the other story on the winter side of things. With that big trough that's going to be moving into parts of the western U.S. and eventually the central U.S. But what really has my attention is what could happen in the Dakotas and really in the Midwest in general. So you can see here things could get pretty windy. It's where you get those close isobars across the central plains and even into the northern plains for a Monday and into Tuesday. And eventually when we get into Thursday, okay, this is when the system begins to enter the picture. Got quite a bit of snow going on across parts of Wyoming, Montana, western Nebraska, parts of the Dakotas. You also have a mix of sleet and freezing rain. That'd be another thing to watch for. Is a potential for freezing rain. So here you go. On Friday, you may have a potential line of some strong thunderstorms that may try to roll through parts of Iowa, down to parts of Missouri, along a very strong cold front. But check out the backside of this low here, and even on the north side. You got heavy freezing rain, heavy sleet, and also heavy snowfall going on here. Now, heavy freezing rain is not necessarily a bad thing. As we learned in the past, especially in the previous winter, heavy freezing rain doesn't accumulate nearly as good, nearly as great as light to moderate freezing rain. So that's something to keep in mind. So anytime if you see a model, especially if you look into freezing rain accumulations from these models here, they're likely to be overdone when it comes to freezing rain. And I'm sure some people are going to show that. But hopefully they say that these numbers are likely to be too high because in reality they will be. But it's not only heavy freeze rain we got going on, you got heavy sleet, and of course, you got the heavy snow. At the same time, you're going to have some strong winds with this system too. There's also isobars are very close to each other, so that's an indication for some strong winds. And that storm system could stick around over parts of Minnesota for a couple of days. And eventually it slowly weakens by Friday and the Saturday. And finally, by Saturday morning, that system should be out here. Still going to have that cold northwest wind, and that's going to bring in well below normal temperatures out there. But snowfall totals. Man, oh man, our models going crazy with snowfall totals. This is from the GFS model, the Cachera ratio. And you're seeing that right. When it comes to snowfall amounts from the GFS, you got snowfall amounts anywhere from 20 to possibly as high as 45 inches of snow. Now, I don't think we're going to see 45 inches of snow, but I think it's definitely doable. We can see snowfall amounts anywhere between 1 to 2 feet. And I think it's definitely possible we could see snowfall amounts at least 2 feet of snow in some places. But there's still plenty of time for changes. But the GFS is not the only model that shows snowfall amounts like that. The European model's got some places getting up to 50 inches of snow. So the models are definitely not, they really have snowfall amounts that are way up there. So that's definitely another thing to consider with its storm system. It has the potential to bring a lot of snow, too much snow. But we also got winds to contend with, and this is the GFS model for Friday morning. You got wind gusts at the backside of the low. 40 to 50 miles per hour. So there's a chance this could truly be a big blizzard, and it could be historic as well, especially if those snowfall totals, if they verify. This could be a historic storm for the Dakotas. So if you're watching from the Dakotas, definitely keep an eye on the forecast over the next several days. I'm also very interested to see whether the National Weather Service posts their snowfall forecast and what they're going to show with the storm system as well. And one more thing before we get out of this topic here is this is the Weather Prediction Center, the probabilities for at least a quarter of an inch of sleet or snow and probabilities are up there. Really, the areas I'll definitely pay attention to will be areas in the blue. That's at least a 50% chance. And in that cyan shade, that's a 70 to 90% chance. It would not surprise me if we see that get upgraded to a 90%, which is in the red. And models have been pretty consistent, especially today, and they all pretty much show the same thing, pretty much. So the consistency is definitely there. I still don't believe we're going to see at least 4 feet of snow like some of the models are suggesting, but we can definitely see snowfall totals that could measure in feet. Still some plenty of time for changes, but it's definitely something we're going to keep an eye on over the next couple of days. All right, so we talked about the winter side, or the strophier general in the hurricane. So here's a look into 500 millibar vorticity. So this is your energy from both sides of the system. So this is where things get a little bit interesting. So by 18Z on Saturday here, you got this big bowling ball system over in the Midwest. And also at the same time, here's your tropical system over parts of Florida. But look what happens when you get into Saturday. Both of these systems begin to interact with each other. So here's your tropical cyclone here. Here's a big trough that's out here. And usually when you see something like this, it could turn to a big storm system, especially for the northeast with a setup like this. But most models at least agree on that it may not really happen that way. It may not phase correctly to really turn into a big storm system. But regardless of that, it's going to bring quite a bit of rain because wherever this trough begins to get close or interacts with this low here, it's going to bring a lot of moisture from a tropical cyclone up north into the northeast, and that could bring in a lot of rain to some places out there as well, which if you were to check out rainfall totals from the European model, generally across the northeast, it's about 1 to 2 inches of rain. But there are some hot spots out there, especially along the East Coast, where rainfall amounts could be in the 3 to 4 inch range. And you can see here that 3 to 4 inch range covers a decent chunk of the East Coast. So if you're watching from the East Coast, definitely be prepared for a decent amount of rain, which a lot of these areas could use some rain. But this is just from mid-range guidance. I would imagine that some of the higher resolution models, wherever they get in range, could be a little bit higher than this. So it's definitely worth watching as well, wherever these two systems begin to interact with each other, especially up into the northeast. As soon as that bowling ball of the system that's going to interact with that tropical system, when both of those get out of the way, we're going to turn into a colder pattern. This is let's actually backtrack here a little bit. This is the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook. So from November 12th through the 16th, almost the entire United States has a chance for below normal temperatures, with the greatest chances being in the central and east central U.S. Basically, the only area that has a chance for above normal temperatures is southern Florida, and it's not a great chance either. The northeast, pretty much equal chances here, but it's definitely not often you see a lot of blue on a map like this. Here's precipitation, and really with a set like this, most of us are dry. Possibly some above normal precipitation anomalies for parts of the Upper Plains, which some of those areas could use a little bit of rain. and also some above normal anomalies in far eastern North Carolina. 8 to 14 days, so this is from November 14th to the 20th. Pretty much the same thing. Really, precipitation is a little bit different. The only exception is that things do try to turn a little bit wetter in parts of the western U.S., and that's really about it. And the reason why we're going to see a pattern change like this is one of two things. Number one, where we've been having some tropical activity in the Atlantic, that's kind of caused everything to kind of slow down a little bit with the progression to the east. And with those tropics getting out of the way, that's going to help bring in this colder normal pattern into the central and eastern U.S. Number two, the MJO is going to change phases. Relative to the past couple of weeks, we've been in phases 5 and 6, and if I'm correct, we should be getting to phases 8 and possibly 1 into the second half of November, and that's going to help bring in this colder than normal pattern across the central and eastern U.S. And more areas will definitely see some snow chances as well with a pattern like this. Cannot say exactly where, but there's a chance that some areas could see some snowflakes for the first time this season. But anyways, guys, this is all for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Guys, like this video, hit that like button. If you like my channel, hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell notification so you never miss an upload. If you guys have questions about this, put it in the comment section down below. I answer you guys questions. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye and have a good day.